New audiobooks on our channel for free every week. Subscribe and click on the bell to not miss.
Robert Kiyosaki. Rich Dad's Guide to Investing. What the rich invest in, but the poor don't invest in. The text is read by Maxim Kareev. Rich Dad's Advice on Investing. Many years ago, I asked my rich dad, "What advice would you give to the average investor?" "Not to be average," he replied. "The rules of money are 90 by 10. Many of you have probably heard about the 80 by 20 rule. In other words, 80% of our success is created by 20% of our efforts. This rule, first formulated by the Italian economist Wilfredo Pareto in 1897, is also known as the principle of least effort. Rich Dad recognized the validity of the 80-20 rule in achieving success in all areas except money. In this case, he only believed in the 90 by 10 rules. After noticing that 10% of people own 90% of all money, Rich Dad said that in the movie world, 10% of actors get 90% of all money, and 10% of all athletes make 90% of all money. The same can be said about musicians. The 90 by 10 rule also applies to the world of investing. That's why Rich Dad advised not to be average. A recent Wall Street Journal article confirmed his point. It says that 90% of all corporate shares in America belong to only 10% of the population. This book explains how some of the investors in that 10% got 90% of all the wealth and how you could do the same. An expression of appreciation. The book Rich Dad, Poor Dad was published on the 8th of April, 1997th year. We printed 1,000 copies, thinking that this number of books would be enough for us for at least a year. And then tens of millions of copies. Close-knit Rich Dad team. Robert and Kim Kiyosaki.
Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so as not to miss the new items.
Introduction. What will you learn by listening to this book? According to the rules of the Securities and Exchange Commission of the United States (SEC), the status of an accredited investor can be obtained by categories of persons who have at least $200,000 of annual income, at least $300,000 of annual income per married couple, at least $1 million of equity. The SEC introduced these requirements to protect the average investor from the world's worst and riskiest investments. However, these rules protect the average investor from the best investments in the world, and this is one of the reasons why Rich Dad advised the average investor not to be average. How to start from scratch. This book begins with the moment of my return from Vietnam in 1973. I had less than a year left before I was discharged from the Marine Corps. This meant that soon I would be left without a job, without money, without assets, and I would have to start everything from scratch. In 1973, I had nothing but the dream that one day I would get rich and become an investor with the right to make investments available only to the rich. These are investments that few people have heard of, that are not written about in financial newspapers, and that are not sold to everyone by investment brokers. After returning from Vietnam, I had nothing but a dream and my rich dad, who taught me how to become an investor. This book will be useful to you regardless of how much money you have today to invest and how much you know about it. The essence of a very complex subject is stated in it as simply as possible. This book is intended for everyone who wants to become more informed investors, regardless of how much money they have. If this is your first book on investing and you are afraid that it will turn out to be too complicated, don't worry. All I ask is that you show a willingness to learn and consciously listen to this book from beginning to end. If some places are not clear to you, just listen to the text without missing anything and without stopping. Even if you do not understand everything that is written in this book, after listening to it to the end, you will know more about the subject of investing than many of those who are currently engaged in investing in the market. I will even say that after listening to the whole book, you will know a lot more about investing than those people who give paid advice in this area. The book begins with the simplest questions and gradually moves on to more complex ones, without particularly going into details and nuances. In a sense, this book is quite simple, although it includes some very complex investment strategies. This is a story about how a rich man guides a young inexperienced person, trying to explain to him the vast and sometimes confusing science of investing with the help of drawings and diagrams. The 90 by 10 rules of money. My rich dad highly appreciated the 80 by 20 rule discovered by the Italian economist Wilfredo Pareto, also known as the principle of least effort. But when it came to money, rich dad preferred to use the 90 by 10 rule, which states that 10% of people make 90% of all money. I am concerned about the fact that more and more families are counting on investments to support them in the future. However, despite the fact that more and more people are engaged in investing, only very few of them are experienced investors. And when the market collapses, what will become of all these newcomers to the investment business? The federal government of the United States protects its citizens' savings from catastrophic losses, but it does not protect their investments. That's why when I asked Rich Dad, "What advice would you give to an average investor?" he replied, "Not to be average." How not to be average? I became interested in investing when I was 12 years old. I've never been interested in this topic before. My head was full of baseball and American football, and there was simply no place for thoughts about investing in it. I've heard the word, but I didn't pay much attention to it until I saw the power of investing. I remember once walking along a small beach with a man I call my rich dad, his son Mike, my best friend. Rich Dad was showing us the real estate he had just bought. Even though I was only 12 years old, I realized that Mike's father had just purchased one of the most valuable properties in our city. Despite my young age, I understood that a plot with a sandy beach facing the ocean was valued higher than a plot without a beach. My first thought was how Mike's dad could afford to buy such an expensive plot. Waves washed the soles of my bare feet, and I stood and looked at the same age as my real father, a man who made one of the biggest financial investments in his life. I looked at him with awe, thinking about how he could afford to buy such a piece of land. I knew that my father earned a lot more money because he was a highly paid government official, but I also knew that he could never afford to buy land right on the ocean. Why could Mike's dad afford to buy this land, but mine couldn't? I didn't realize yet that at that very moment, when I realized the powerful power contained in the word investing, my career as a professional investor began. Now, when about 40 years have passed since the day of that walk, the students of my investment courses ask me questions similar to those that I started asking my rich dad. How can I invest when I have no money? I have $10,000 to invest. Where would you advise me to invest them? What do you recommend investing in? In real estate, mutual funds, or stocks? Can I buy real estate or stocks without money? It takes money to make money, doesn't it? Is investing risky? How do you get such high returns with such little risk? Can I invest with you? People are beginning to realize the powerful power hidden in the word investing. Many people want to know how to make it work for themselves. I hope that by listening to this book, you will get answers to many of these questions, and if not, it will encourage you to look for answers that will work for you. More than 40 years ago, Rich Dad aroused my curiosity about investing. I became interested when I realized that my best friend's dad, a man who earned less money than my real dad, was making investments that only rich people could afford. I realized that my rich dad had some kind of power that my own father did not have, and I also wanted to have such power. Many people are afraid of this force and try to stay away from it, and many even become its victims. But instead of running away from this force or condemning it, saying something like, "The rich exploit the poor, it's too risky to invest," or "I don't even want to be rich," I began to show interest in it, which, together with the desire to gain the power that knowledge and skills give, prompted me to choose the path of learning. This is the path I've been following all my life. You need to invest the way the rich do. This book will not give you the specific answers you may be waiting for. It will only help to get an idea of how many of the richest people who achieved everything on their own made money and continued to multiply them, making huge fortunes. When, at the age of 12, I stood on the beach and looked at the plot of land that Rich Dad had just acquired, my mind opened up to a whole world of possibilities that I did not have in my father's house. I realized that it wasn't money that made Rich Dad a successful investor, but a mindset that contradicted, and sometimes directly opposed, the mindset of my real father. It became clear to me that if I wanted to gain the same financial strength that Rich Dad had, then I would need to understand how he thinks. I knew that if I learned to think like him, I would be rich for the rest of my days. But if that doesn't happen, then I will never become truly rich, no matter how much money I have. Mike's father had just invested in one of the most expensive plots of land in our city, although he had no money. I realized that wealth is a way of thinking, not the number of dollars in the bank. It is with this way of thinking of rich investors that I want to introduce you in this book. Rich Dad's Answer. Standing on the beach 40 years ago, I finally plucked up the courage and asked Rich Dad, "How could you afford to buy these 10 acres of very expensive land on the coast when even my dad can't afford it?" And Mike's father gave me an answer that I will remember for the rest of my life. He put his arm around my shoulders, and we walked along the shore at the very edge of the water. Rich Dad began to explain to me in a friendly way the basics of his ideas about money and investing. "I can't afford to buy this land either, but my business can." That day, Mike, his father, and I walked along the beach for an hour. That's how my investing lesson started. A few years ago, I conducted a 3-day course on investing in Sydney. For the first day and a half I was engaged in discussing the details of creating a business. In the end, one of the listeners raised his hand in annoyance and said, "I came to learn investing. Why do you spend so much time talking about business?" I answered, "There are 2 reasons for this. The number 1 reason is that what we ultimately invest in is business. By investing in stocks or bonds, you are investing in a business. If you are buying a property, such as an apartment building, then this house is also a business. Therefore, in order to be a good investor, you must first of all be well versed in business. Reason number 2, the best way to invest capital is when your business buys investments for you. The worst way is to invest as an individual. The average investor knows very little about business, so he often invests as an individual. That's why I devote so much time to business in my investment courses. In this book, I will also pay attention to the topic of building a business and analyzing its effectiveness, as well as the topic of investing with the help of business, because this is how Rich Dad taught me to invest money. As he told me 40 years ago, "I can't afford to buy this land either, but my business can." In other words, Rich Dad's rule was this: my business buys me investments. Most people are not rich because they invest as individuals, not as business owners. In this book, you will learn why most of the richest people in the world own businesses through which they invest, and how you can do the same. During the classes, the mentioned listener understood why I devoted so much time to business. As we moved forward, he and everyone else began to realize that the richest investors do not buy investments, but create them. Those who are not yet 30 years old become billionaires not because they buy investments. They create investments that are called businesses and arouse the desire of millions of people to buy them. Almost every day I hear people say, "I have ideas for a new product that will bring millions." Unfortunately, most of these creative ideas will never turn into huge fortunes. Nevertheless, 10% of people turn their ideas into a multi-million and even multi-billion-dollar business in which other investors invest. That's why Rich Dad spent so much time teaching me how to build and analyze the business I'm going to invest in. So if you have an idea that you think can make you rich or even help you join the ranks of 90-10 investors, then this book will be of invaluable help to you. Buy, hold and pray. Rich Dad always emphasized that different people understand different things by investing. Today I often hear them say, "I just bought 500 shares of XYZ at a price of $5 per share. The price went up to $15 and I sold them. I made $5,000 in less than a week. My husband and I buy old houses, repair them, and then sell them at a profit. I trade commodity futures. I have over $1 million in my retirement account. I have a diversified portfolio. I am investing for the long term." As Rich Dad used to say, different people understand different things by investing. The phrases given earlier relate to various types of investment objects and procedures, but Rich Dad did not use any of these investment methods. He said, most people are not investors, they are either speculators or gamblers. Most people have a buy, hold and pray mentality that the price goes up. They live in the hope that the market will hold, and in fear that it will collapse. A true investor makes money regardless of the direction of the market. He makes money regardless of whether he wins or loses, acting in both long-term and short-term mode. The average investor does not know how to do this, so most investors are average, making up those 90% who make only 10% of all money. More than just buy, hold and pray. Investing meant more to Rich Dad than buying, holding, and praying, so the following topics are covered in this book. The first, 10 management tools that can reduce risk and increase investor profits. Rich Dad used to say, it's not risky to invest, it's risky not to be able to manage. The second, 5 facets of Rich Dad's plan, which allowed me to move from complete lack of money to investing a lot of money. The first stage of Rich Dad's plan was to mentally prepare me to become a rich investor. This is a simple but very important phase for anyone who wants to invest their money confidently. Third, tax laws for each type of investor. In the book The Cash Flow Quadrant, I talk about 4 different categories of people found in the business world: P. employees, C. self-employed and small business owners, B. large business owners from 500 employees, and investors. Rich Dad encouraged me to invest from the B quadrant, where favorable tax laws exist. He constantly said, tax laws are unfair. They are written by the rich for the rich. If you want to be rich, you have to use the same tax laws that wealthy people use. One of the reasons why 10% of people control most of the wealth is that only they know how to use tax laws. In 1943, the federal government closed most of the tax loopholes for all employees, and in 1986, for representatives of the C quadrant: doctors, lawyers, accountants, engineers, and architects. In other words, another reason why 10% of investors make 90% of the money is that only they know how to invest capital from different squares to get different tax advantages. The average investor most often invests only in one square. Fourth, why and how a true investor makes money in both a growing and a falling market. The fifth is the difference between fundamental and technical investment. Sixth, 5 types of top-level investors. In the book The Cash Flow Square, I described in detail the 5 levels of investors. But in addition, investors of the top 2 levels are divided into 5 categories: accredited investors, qualified investors, sophisticated investors, insiders, investors of the highest category. After listening to this audiobook, you will know what practical skills and theoretical knowledge an investor should have in each of these categories. Seventh, the difference between a lack of money and an excess of money. Many people say, when I make a lot of money, my financial problems will end. They don't understand that having too much money is just as big a problem as not having enough of it. From this book, you will learn what is the difference between the 2 types of financial difficulties. One problem is a lack of money, and the other is an excess. Few people realize how serious the problem of too much money can be. One of the reasons that people get rich and often go broke is that they don't know how to deal with the problem of excess money. From this book you will learn how to get rich and then solve the problem of excess money. In other words, you will learn not only to make a lot of money, but also to save it. As my rich dad said, what's the use of making a lot of money if you lose everything later? A friend of mine, a stockbroker, once said, the average investor is not able to make a fortune in the market. I constantly see how many investors, having made money, lose it next year. Eighth, how to make a lot more than $200,000 to achieve a minimum income level that allows you to start investing the way the rich do. Rich Dad used to say, money is just a point of view. How can you become rich if you think that $200,000 is a lot of money? If you want to be a rich investor, you should understand that this is the minimum amount to register as an accredited investor. That is why the first phase of this book is so important. Its purpose is to prepare your mind to become a rich investor. At the end of each chapter, small intelligence tests are offered, aimed at getting you to think and, if necessary, discuss the answers with people close to you. Such questions were used by my rich dad to help me engage in introspection and find the answers I was looking for. In other words, many of the investment-related answers I was looking for were actually hidden within myself. What makes an investor 90-10 special? One of the most important aspects in this book is related to the differences in the mentality of the average investor and the mentality of the 90-10 investor. Rich Dad often said, if you want to be rich, find out what everyone else is doing and do the exact opposite. Listening to this book, you will learn that most of the differences between the 10% of investors who make 90% of all the money and the 90% who make only 10% of the money is not what they invest in, but how they think. For example, most investors say, it's better not to take risks. A rich investor takes risks. Most investors say it is necessary to diversify. A rich investor focuses on one thing. The average investor tries to minimize debts. A rich investor increases debts in order to benefit from them. The average investor tries to reduce costs. A rich investor knows how to increase expenses in order to become even richer. The average investor has a job. A rich investor creates jobs. The average investor works hard. A rich investor works less and less to earn more and more. The flip side of the coin. While listening to this book, try to note those moments when your thoughts will be 180 degrees at odds with the fundamental ideas of my rich dad. He said, one of the reasons that so few people become rich is that they fixate on one way of thinking. It seems to them that there is only one way to think about something or do something. While the average investor thinks you need to play for sure and not take risks, the rich should also think about how to improve their skills so that they can take on more risk. Rich Dad called this style of thinking the ability to think about both sides of the coin. He said, a rich investor should have a more flexible mindset than the average one. For example, both the average and the rich investor should think about security, but the rich investor should also think about how to afford more risk. If the average investor is thinking about how to get rid of debts, then the rich are thinking about how to increase them. If the average investor lives in fear of a possible market collapse, then the rich are waiting for it with hope. The average investor thinks that this contradicts logic, but it is this contradiction that makes a rich investor rich. While listening to the book, do not forget about the contradictions between the thinking of average and the thinking of rich investors. As Rich Dad used to say, a true investor never forgets that every coin has two sides. The average investor sees only one side. But it is the side that the average investor does not see that makes him average, and the rich rich. This reverse side of the coin will be discussed in the second part of the book. Do you want to be more than an average investor? This is not just a book about investing with tips and magic formulas. One of its main goals is to form a different point of view on investing in you. This book begins with my return from Vietnam in 1973 and preparation to start investing as a rich investor. In 1973, Rich Dad began teaching me how to acquire the same financial power that he possessed, a power that I first learned about at the age of 12. Standing on a sandy beach 40 years ago and looking at my rich dad's recently made investment, I realized that when it came to investing, the difference between Rich Dad and my dad was not just how much money each of them had to invest. The main difference was the deep desire of a person to become more than just an average investor. If you have such an aspiration, then listen further. The first phase. Are you mentally ready to become an investor? Chapter 1. Investor Lesson Number 1. What should I invest in? In 1973, I returned home from Vietnam. I was lucky that I was assigned to a base located on the Hawaiian Islands near my home, and not on the east coast of the United States. After settling in at the Marine Corps Air Station, I called my friend Mike, and we agreed to have lunch with his father, the man I call my rich dad. Mike couldn't wait to show me his newborn son and his new home, so we agreed to have lunch at his house next Saturday. When Mike's limo pulled up to pick me up outside the dreary gray building of the Garrison Dormitory for single officers, I began to realize how much had changed since we graduated from high school together in 1965. "Welcome home," Mike said as I walked into the front of his magnificent marble-floored house. Mike was glowing, holding his 7-month-old son in his arms. "I'm glad you came back safe and sound." "Me too," I replied, and Sam looked past Mike at the plain blue expanse of the Pacific Ocean turning into white sand in front of his house. The house was gorgeous, a one-story mansion in a tropical style embodied all the elegance and charm of the old and new way of life in Hawaii. Inside there were magnificent Persian carpets and tall green plants in tubs. The large pool was surrounded by the house on 3 sides, and the ocean was on the 4th. Immaculate to the smallest detail, the house looked like the standard of stylish island life, the real embodiment of my ideas about luxurious life in Hawaii. "Let me introduce you to my son James," Mike said. Suddenly coming to my senses, I said. My jaw must have dropped, because I fell into a trance state, overwhelmed by the beauty of this house. "What a lovely baby," I said, as any person would say when looking at a baby. But while I stood and made faces at the baby, who looked at me indifferently, my mind still could not recover from the shock, the realization of how much had changed in 8 years. I lived on a military base, in an old dormitory, in the same apartment with 3 untidy, beer-crazed young pilots, while Mike, with his beautiful wife and newborn son, lived in an estate worth several $1,000,000. "Come on in," Mike continued. "Dad and Connie are waiting for us on the patio." The dinner was incomparable. Their regular maids served at the table. I was sitting enjoying the food, the scenery and the company, but suddenly I remembered my roommates, who were probably having lunch in the officers' mess at that moment. It was Saturday, which meant that soup and a sandwich were served for lunch. When the usual pleasantries and memories of the old days were left behind, Rich Dad said, "As you can see, Mike has done a good job investing the profits from the business. We've made more money in the last 2 years than I have in the first 20. It's true they say that the first million is the most difficult." "So things are going well?" I asked in the hope of learning more about how their fortune soared so rapidly. "Great," Rich Dad said. "These new Boeings are bringing so many tourists from all over the world to Hawaii that the business has no choice but to grow. But the real success was brought to us by investments rather than business. And Mike is responsible for the investment." "Congratulations," I turned to Mike. "Did a good job." "Thanks," Mike replied. "But it's not just me who needs to be praised. Dad's investment formula is the main workforce. I'm just doing what he's been teaching us all these years. And this is clearly bearing fruit," I noticed. "I can't believe you live here, in the richest area of the city. And do you remember how we poor boys had to wade with surfboards between houses to get to the beach?" Mike laughed. "Yes, I remember. I remember how these feisty and rich guys chased us. Now I am an evil rich man myself, running and chasing the same boys. Who would have thought that you and I would live together?" Mike suddenly fell silent, realizing what a stupid thing he had blurted out. While he lived here, I lived on the other side of the island in a shabby barracks. "Sorry," he said, "I didn't mean to." "Come on, there's nothing to apologize for," I said, with a somewhat strained grin. "I am happy for you, glad that you have become so rich and successful. You deserve it because you took the time to learn how to run a business. As soon as my contract in the Marine Corps ends, I will immediately say goodbye to the barracks." Sensing the tension that had arisen between Mike and me, Rich Dad intervened in the conversation. "He did a better job than I did. I am very proud of my son and his wife. They are a great team and have earned everything they have. And now, Robert, when you've come back from the war, it's your turn. I would really like to invest with you," I eagerly picked up. I saved almost $3,000 in Vietnam and would like to invest it before I squandered it. Can I invest with you? Okay, I'll recommend you a good stockbroker, Rich Dad said. I'm sure he'll give you some good advice, maybe even a couple of good leads. No, 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 I exclaimed. I want to invest in the same things that you do. Look, I've known you both for so long. You are always working on something or investing in something. I don't want to go to a broker, I want to do business with you. There was silence in the room. I was waiting for some kind of answer from Rich Dad or Mike. The tension was building. Did I say something wrong? I finally asked. No, Mike said. Dad and I are currently investing in a couple of new, quite interesting projects, but I still think you'd better call one of our brokers first and start investing with him. And again there was silence, interrupted only by the clink of plates and glasses, which the maid was clearing from the table. Connie, Mike's wife, asked her to excuse her and got up to take the baby to another room. I don't understand, I said, and addressing Rich Dad rather than Mike, I continued, I have worked with both of you for so many years, helping to build your business. I worked almost for nothing. On your advice, I went to college, and then went to fight for my country when you said that a young man should do it. And now that I'm old enough and I finally have a couple $1,000s to invest. You don't seem to like it when I say I want to invest in the same things you do. I don't understand what happened. Why is there some kind of coldness in our relationship? Are you showing off in front of me or are you trying to kick me off? Don't you want me to become as rich as you? There's no cold, Mike replied. You are wrong when you say that we are arrogant in front of you or do not want you to become rich. It's just that the situation has changed. Rich Dad nodded slowly in silent agreement. We would be happy if you would invest in what we invest in, he finally said, but it would be a violation of the law. Violation of the law? I exclaimed in disbelief. Are you guys doing something illegal? No, no, Rich Dad grinned. We would never do anything illegal. When there are so many opportunities to become rich legally, there is no point in risking doing illegal things. It is precisely because we comply with the law that we say that if you invest with us, it will be a violation of the law, Mike said. It's not illegal for Mike and me to invest in what we invest in, but it would be illegal for you. Rich Dad summed it up. But why? I wondered. Because you're not rich. Mike answered gently and cautiously. What we invest in is only good for the rich. Mike's words hurt my soul. Since he was my best friend, I knew it wasn't easy for him to tell me that. And although Mike tried to put it as gently as possible, he hurt me. I was beginning to realize how deep the financial gap between us was. Despite the fact that our parents started from scratch, my mother and his dad created a huge fortune, and my father and I were still on the other side of the road. I had a feeling that this big house with a white sandy beach was somewhere very far away from me, at a distance that could not be measured in miles. Leaning back in my chair and folding my arms on my chest, I sat and nodded quietly, comprehending what I had heard. We were both 25 years old, but financially Mike was 25 years older than me. My own father had just been practically fired from the civil service, and at the age of 52 he had to start from scratch for the second time. And I haven't even started yet. Are you all right? Rich Dad asked solicitously. Yes, I replied, trying my best not to show the pain I felt from feeling sorry for myself and my family. I just need to think hard and dig into myself, I said, forcing myself to grin bravely. There was silence in the room. We listened to the sound of the waves. A cool breeze brought freshness to this magnificent house. Mike, his father, and I sat in silence until little by little I began to accept the reality of what I had heard. So I can't invest with you because I'm not rich, I finally said, coming out of my trance. And if I were to invest in what you invest in, would it be a violation of the law? Rich Dad and Mike nodded. In a way. Mike added. And who issued such a law? I asked. The federal government, Mike replied. The SEC, his father added. SEC? I asked again. What is the SEC? The Securities and Exchange Commission, Rich Dad explained. It was created in the 1930s under the leadership of Joseph Kennedy, the father of our late President John F. Kennedy. And what was it created for? I asked. Rich Dad laughed. In order to protect society from wild and scrupulous dealers, businessmen, brokers, and investors. Why are you laughing? I was surprised. It seems to be a good idea. Yes, it was a good idea, Mike's father replied, still chuckling. Before the stock market crash in 1929, many dubious, unreliable and fake investments were sold to people. A lot of lies and misinformation were spread. That's why the SEC was created to control the situation. This is a body that helps to create rules, as well as ensure their implementation. He plays a very important role. Without the SEC, we would have chaos. Then why are you laughing? I persistently repeated my question. Yes, because, protecting ordinary people from bad investments, the SEC at the same time does not allow them to the best investments, Rich Dad replied in more serious tones. But if the SEC protects people from the worst investments and does not allow them to the best, then what are they investing in? I asked. In verified facilities, Rich Dad replied, in investments that meet the standards established by the SEC. So what's wrong with that? I asked. Nothing, Rich Dad said. I think it's a good idea. We have to have rules, and we have to follow them. This is what the SEC is doing. What's so funny about that? I asked. I have known you for many years and I see that you are not telling me something. I've already told you, Rich Dad repeated, that I'm laughing because, while protecting people from bad investments, the SEC simultaneously keeps them away from the best ones. And this is one of the reasons that the rich are getting richer? I asked uncertainly. That's right, Rich Dad said. I laugh because I see the paradox of the whole picture. People invest because they want to become rich. But because they are not rich yet, they are not allowed to invest in investments that could make them rich. Only if you become rich will you be able to invest in what the wealthiest people invest in. That's why only the rich can get richer. Such is the paradox. But why is this done? I asked. Is it really to protect the poor and the middle class from the rich? No, not necessarily, Mike replied. I think, in fact, this is done in order to protect the poor and the middle class from themselves. What are you saying? I was surprised. The fact is that there are a lot more bad deals than good ones, Rich Dad said. For an inexperienced investor, all transactions, both good and bad, look the same. Solid educational experiences are needed to be able to discern the good and bad among complex investments. But to be sophisticated, you need to know what makes some investments promising and others dangerous. And most people just don't have that kind of education and experience. Mike, can you show us the latest deal that we've just started considering? Mike got up from his desk, went to his office and returned with a folder 3 fingers thick, and it was filled with texts, digital tables, photographs, diagrams and maps. Here is an example of what we are studying for investment opportunities, Mike said, sitting down at the table. This is an unregistered security or a private placement memorandum. The longer Mike flipped through the pages and showed me graphs, charts, maps and texts describing the possible risks and profits from this investment, the less I understood. Listening to why Mike thought this was such a great investment opportunity, I felt sleepy. Rich Dad, seeing that I didn't understand anything, made a sign to Mike to stop the flow of information I didn't understand and said, "This is exactly what Robert should have seen." Then he pointed to the cover of the folder, where a small paragraph of text was printed under the heading Extract from the Securities Act of 1933. "I want you to understand that," he said. I leaned forward to get a better look at the fine print that Mike's father was pointing at. It was written there, "This investment is intended exclusively for accredited investors." As accredited investors, categories of persons can qualify who have, at least $1 million of equity, at least $200,000 for each of the last 2 years, at least $300,000 for a married couple if there is convincing evidence that the expected income in the current year will remain at the same level. Leaning back in my chair, I said, "So that's why you say I can't invest in the same thing you do. These investments are only for the rich. Or for people with high incomes," Mike added. "Not only are these requirements strict, but also the fact that the minimum that can be invested in this investment is $35,000. This is the price of one investment unit. $35,000. I gasped, "But it's a lot of money and a lot of risk. Are you saying that this is the least that can be invested in this transaction?" Mike's father nodded. "How much the state pays you as a Marine Corps pilot?" "In Vietnam, I received $12,000 a year. To tell the truth, I don't know yet how much I'll be paid now that I'm working in Hawaii. Maybe they will give an additional monetary allowance in connection with the increase in the subsistence minimum, but it will obviously be small and certainly will not cover the cost of living in Hawaii." "In that case, the $3,000 you saved should be considered a great achievement," Rich Dad remarked, trying to cheer me up somehow. "You've saved almost 25% of your total income." I nodded, and thought to myself how infinitely far I was from becoming this accredited investor. I figured that even if I had reached the rank of general, I still would not have received enough money to be considered an accredited investor. So what should I do? I finally asked. "Why can't I just give you my $3,000 so that you add them to your money, and after the transaction brings a return, divide the profit?" "We could do it," Rich Dad said, "but I wouldn't recommend it. Not to you, anyway." "Why?" I asked. "Why not me? You already have a fairly good foundation of financial education, so you can go much further than just becoming an accredited investor. If you want to, you can become a sophisticated investor. Then you will acquire wealth that you never dreamed of even in your most fantastic dreams." Accredited investor, sophisticated investor. What is the difference between them? I asked, feeling a spark of hope flare up in me again. "Good question," Mike smiled, feeling that his friend was starting to get out of the abyss of despair. "Anyone who has money can qualify as an accredited investor. That's why accredited investors are often called qualified," Rich Dad explained. "But in order to become a sophisticated investor, money alone is not enough." "So what's the difference?" I asked. "Have you seen the headlines of yesterday's newspapers, where it says that a famous Hollywood actor lost millions on an investment scam?" Rich Dad asked. I nodded. "Yes, I saw it. And not only lost millions, but also had to pay taxes for all the money he invested in this deal." "Here's an example of an accredited or qualified investor," Rich Dad continued. "Just because you have money doesn't mean you're a sophisticated investor. That's why we keep hearing how many highly paid people, such as doctors, lawyers, rock stars, professional athletes, lose money on investments that can hardly be called reliable. They have money, but no sophistication. They have money, but they don't know how to invest it safely and with high returns. All transactions look the same to them. They are not able to distinguish a good investment from a bad one. People like them should only deal with proven investments or hire a professional financial manager whom they could trust to invest money on their behalf." "And who do you call a sophisticated investor?" I asked. "A sophisticated investor is a person who has 3 O's. Rich Dad answered. 3O? I repeated. "What else are the 3 O's? Mike's father turned over the private placement memorandum that was in front of us and wrote on the back of one of the pages, "Education, experience, deferred or excess money." "These are the 3 O's, he said. "When you have these 3 things, you will become a sophisticated investor." Looking at these 3 points, I said, "So, then, the actor had excess money, but the first 2 things were missing." Rich Dad nodded affirmatively. "There are many people who have the necessary education, but no experience. And without real-life experience, it is difficult for them to save the necessary money. When you explain something to such people, they say, 'I know, but for some reason they don't do what they know," Mike added. "When a bank employee sees what we're doing, he always says, 'I know.' But he never does what he claims to know. That's why he doesn't have any excess money," I noticed. Mike and his father nodded. There was silence in the room again. Each of the three of us was deep in our own thoughts. Rich Dad signaled the maid to bring more coffee, and Mike began to put the folder of documents in order to take it back. I sat with my arms folded on my chest, looking into the distance, at the dark blue Pacific Ocean and thinking in which direction my life would go. I graduated from college, as my parents wanted. My military duty will soon be fulfilled, and then I will be free to choose the path that suits me best. "What are you thinking about?" Mike's father asked, holding a cup of fragrant coffee in his hands. "About who I want to become," I answered. "And by whom?" Mike asked. "I think I should become a sophisticated investor, whatever that means," I said quietly. "It would be a wise choice," Rich Dad said. "You already have a pretty good foundation. The basics of a solid financial education. Now is the time to gain some experience." "And how will I know when I have enough of both?" I asked. "When you save enough excess money," Mike's father replied with a smile. We laughed and raised glasses of water, declaring a toast to excess money. Then Mike's father offered another toast. "And for you to become a sophisticated investor." For becoming a sophisticated investor and for excess money, I repeated once again to myself. I liked the echoes of those words ringing in my head. Mike called the driver of his limo, and I returned to my shabby apartment in the dormitory for single officers to think about what to do with my life. I was an adult. I fulfilled what my parents expected from me. He was educated in college and served in the army. Now it's time for me to decide what to do. The idea of studying and becoming a sophisticated investor attracted me. I could continue to study under the guidance of Rich Dad, gaining the necessary experience. But now Mike's father will be mentoring me as an adult. 20 years later, by 9 years was not so difficult. It was much more difficult to keep him and make him work for himself. But in spite of everything, I was able to gain financial freedom and make enough money to retire in 1994, at the age of 47, and allow myself to enjoy life. However, it was not going on vacation that pleased me, but the opportunity to invest as a sophisticated investor. Being able to invest side by side with Mike and Rich Dad was the goal I needed to strive for. That day back in 1973, when Mike and his father said that I was not rich enough to invest with them, was a turning point in my life when I set myself the goal of becoming a sophisticated investor. Here is a list of some investments in which accredited and sophisticated investors invest money. Private placement of securities. Syndicates and limited liability partnerships that own real estate, companies that are preparing for an initial public offering of shares. Initial public offering of shares (IPO). The shares are offered for open sale to all investors, but not always readily available. Subprime financing. Mergers and acquisitions of companies, loans to start a business, hedge funds. For the average investor, these investments are too risky, not because they are risky in themselves, but because they usually lack the education, experience and excess capital to cope with the complexities of these operations. Today, I tend to support the SEC that it is necessary to better protect unqualified investors by prohibiting them from accessing these types of investments. The fact is that I myself have made a lot of mistakes in this area in my time, and I know that others are not immune from them either. Today I am already a sophisticated investor and I am happy to invest in such enterprises. When you know what you are doing, the risk is small and the potential return can be huge. It is in such investments that rich people most often invest their money. Although I have to suffer some losses, but the impressive returns from successful investments more than cover them. 35% return on invested capital is the norm for me, but sometimes this figure rises to 1,000% and pain. I prefer to invest in such investments because I find them more interesting and see this as a challenge for myself. It's not as simple as asking, buy 100 shares of such a company from me and sell 100 shares of such a company. In this case, it is not enough to just ask, is the price-profit ratio high or low here? The essence of the work of a sophisticated investor is not this. The main task of those involved in these investments is to get close to the so-called engine of capitalism. Some of the listed investments belong to venture capital investments, are too risky for average investors. But in fact, the risk is not in investments as such. What makes them risky for average investors is their lack of education, experience, and excess money. The Path. This book is not only about investments. It is primarily about the investor, about how to find the right way to gain 3O, education, experience, deferred or excess money, and about the way that you need to do to become a sophisticated investor. The book Rich Dad, Poor Dad talks about the education I received as a child, and in the Square of the Cash Flow about my education in the period from 1973 to 1994. Rich Dad's Guide to Investing is based on the lessons of previous years and turns these lessons into the 3 O's necessary to become a sophisticated investor. In 1973, I barely scraped together $3,000 to invest and did not have insufficient education or real-life experience. By 1994, I had become a sophisticated investor. Many years ago, Rich Dad said, just as there are homes for the rich, for the poor and for the middle class, there are investments for each of these three categories. If you want to invest like the rich invest, you have to be more than rich. You have to become a sophisticated investor, not just a person who invests money. 5 phases turning into a sophisticated investor. Rich Dad divided my development program into 5 clearly defined phases, the names of which corresponded to the main questions that you should ask yourself at each stage. The first, are you mentally ready to become an investor? Second, what kind of investor do you want to become? Third, how to create a strong business. Fourth, who is a sophisticated investor? The fifth is how to give. This book is written as a guide. She won't give you specific answers. Its purpose is to help you understand what questions you need to ask yourself. If you do this, then my task will be completed. Mike's father used to say, it is impossible to teach a person to become a sophisticated investor. He must learn this himself. This process can be compared to learning to ride a bicycle. I can't teach you how to ride a bike, but you can learn it yourself. Learning to ride a bike requires risk, trial, error, and proper guidance. The same is the case with investing. If you don't want to take risks, then you don't want to study. And if you don't want to learn, then I can't teach you. If you are looking for a book with tips on investing, with a recipe for getting rich quick, or with a secret formula for investing for the rich, then this book is not for you. In fact, it's more about learning than investing. This book is written for people who want to learn how to invest and find their own way to wealth, and not just the shortest way to it. From it, you will learn about the 5 phases of development that Rich Dad went through at one time and that I am now going through. If you are striving to learn how to create great wealth, you will be able to notice that the 5 phases of a rich dad are the same 5 phases that the richest businessmen and investors on the planet went through to become very, very rich. Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, Warren Buffett, America's richest investor. Thomas Edison, founder of General Electric. All of them have gone through these 5 phases. And now they are being held by new, young millionaires and billionaires of the internet era who have not yet turned 30. The only difference is that in the information age, young people go through 5 phases faster, and I really hope that you can do it too. The information revolution. Huge wealth, immense fortunes, mega-rich families arose during the Industrial Revolution. The same thing is happening today, during the information revolution. I find it interesting that today, along with 20, 30 and 40-year-old multimillionaires and billionaires who have achieved everything themselves, there are many people who are 40 or more years old, but they barely make ends meet, clinging to a job with a salary of $50,000 a year. One of the reasons for such a huge disparity lies in the transition from the industrial era to the information one. When we entered the industrial era, people like Henry Ford and Thomas Edison became billionaires. Today, in the information age, we see people like Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, and the founders of internet companies becoming millionaires and billionaires. Guys who are barely in their 20s will soon surpass Bill Gates in wealth. This is the power of the transition from the industrial age to the information age. There is nothing stronger than an idea whose time has come, and there is nothing more harmful than holding on to old ideas. I hope this book will help you take a different look at old ideas and maybe find new ideas for creating wealth. Perhaps it will change the paradigm of your life and lead you to the same radical changes that marked the transition from the industrial era to the information one. Perhaps this book will help you find a new financial path and make you think like businessmen and investors, and not like employees or people working for themselves. It took me many years to go through all these phases, and, to tell the truth, I'm still doing it. After listening to this book, you may decide that you should also go through these 5 phases or come to the conclusion that this path of development does not suit you. If you dare to do this, then the speed of passing through the 5 phases of development will depend only on you. Remember that this book is not about how to become rich quickly. And you will begin to face difficulties on the path of personal development and education you have chosen already in the first phase, the phase of mental preparation. Are you mentally ready to be an investor? Rich Dad often said, "Money will be everything you want." By saying this, he meant that money is created by our mind, by our thoughts. If someone says money is hard to get, it will really be hard to get it. If someone says, "Oh, I will never become rich," or "Yes, it is difficult to become rich," then most likely this will be the case for this person. If a person declares that the only way to become rich is to work hard, then he will most likely really work hard. If a person says, "If I have a lot of money, I will put it in the bank, because I don't know what to do with it," then most likely this will happen. You'd be surprised how many people do just that. And if a person says, "Investing is risky," then it will be so. Rich Dad warned me that the mental preparation to become a sophisticated investor seems to be similar to the mental preparation required to climb Mount Everest or to take the priesthood. He was joking, of course, but at the same time he was letting me know that such a case should not be taken lightly. Mike's dad told me, "You're starting out the same way I am. Without money. All you have is hope and a dream to achieve great wealth. Many people dream about it, but few people succeed. Think hard and prepare your mind, because you have to learn how to invest in a way that only very few are allowed to. You will see the world of investing from the inside, not from the outside. There are much easier ways in life and easier ways to invest, so think about it again. If you decide that this is really your way, prepare for it." Chapter 2 Investor Lesson Number 2 How to Lay the Foundation of Wealth. That evening it was very hard to return to the dull gray building of the officers' dormitory. Even at the beginning of the day, when I left, it seemed to me quite decent, but now, after a day spent in Mike's new house, the officers' apartments looked cheap, old, and depressing. As I expected, my 3 roommates were drinking beer and watching a baseball game on TV. Pizza boxes and beer cans were everywhere. When I walked through the common living room, neither of them said anything. They just sat there, staring at the TV. When I entered my room and closed the door, I felt joy that everyone had separate rooms. At the age of 25, I finally understood what I could not understand as a 9-year-old child when I began to comprehend the philosophy of Rich Dad. Mike's father has worked hard for many years to lay a solid foundation for his wealth. He started in a poor part of the city, lived economically, built a business, bought real estate, and worked on the implementation of his plan. Now I realize that his plan was to become very rich. When Mike and I went to high school, his father began to actively expand his activities in Hawaii, buying various kinds of businesses and real estate there. And when Mike and I went to college, he made his big move and became one of the leading private investors in Honolulu. While I was flying the Marine Corps flag in Vietnam, he completed the foundation of his wealth. The foundation turned out to be solid and reliable. And now Rich Dad and his family enjoyed the fruits of their labor and lived not in a poor area on one of the remote islands, but in the most respectable area of Honolulu. But unlike many residents of the area, they didn't just look rich. I knew for sure that Mike and his father were rich, because they gave me a look at their financial statements certified by an auditor. Such an honor was given to few. But my own father just lost his job. He climbed the corporate ladder in the state government for a long time and stubbornly, but suddenly fell out of favor with the political machine. By taking part in the gubernatorial elections and losing to his own boss, my father lost everything he had achieved with such difficulty. The state authorities had blacklisted him, and now his father was trying to start all over again. He had no foundation of wealth. Although he was 52 and I was 25, we were both in the same financial situation. We didn't have any money. We both had higher education and could get another job, but if we talk about real assets, we had nothing. That night, lying on my bunk, I realized that I had received a rare opportunity to choose my life path. I say rare, because very few have such an opportunity to compare the life paths of two people and choose the one that is right. It wasn't an easy choice. Investments for the rich. That night, a lot of thoughts were spinning in my head, but most of all I was worried that there are investments only for the rich, and only then for everyone else. I remembered that when I was a child and worked for a rich dad, he talked all the time only about building his business. But now that he was rich, he talked only about his investments. Investments for the rich. At lunch that day, he explained it this way: I created a business just to be able to invest the way the rich do. The business had to be created so that he could buy assets for me. Without a business, I would not be able to afford to invest in investments that are available only to the rich. Developing his idea, Mike's father emphasized the difference between how an employee buys investments and how a business owner acquires them. He said, for an employee, most investments are too expensive. But if my business buys them for me, then they are quite permissible. I didn't understand what he meant, but I knew that this distinction was very important. Now I couldn't wait to find out exactly what it was. At one time, Rich Dad carefully studied corporate and tax legislation in order to use it to his advantage to find ways to make a lot of money. That night I fell asleep with the firm intention of calling Mike's father in the morning. Different quadrants, different paths. In my youth, when it came to money, I didn't know which dad to listen to. Both were good, hard-working people. Both were strong and charismatic personalities. Both said that I should go to college and serve in the army for the good of my country. But they talked about money in different ways and gave different advice about who I should be when I grow up. Now I could compare the results of the career paths chosen by my father and Mike's father. My poor dad advised, go to school, get good grades, and then find yourself a stable job with good benefits. He recommended me to make a career in squares P and C. Rich Dad said, learn to build a business and invest with it. He advised building a career in sectors B and I. There are key emotional and technical differences between people in each quadrant, which ultimately determine which sector a person prefers to operate in. For example, someone who needs job security is likely to choose the P square, which contains people from a wide variety of backgrounds, from cleaners to company presidents. A person who strives to do everything on his own can often be found in the quadrant with the sector of self-employed persons and small business owners. We can also say that C also means a specialist, a soloist, and a self-confident know-it-all, because it is here that you can find most professionals, such as doctors, lawyers, accountants, and other technical consultants. The scheme of the cash flow quadrant explains the difference between the C quadrant, in which the majority of small business owners operate, and the B quadrant, where the owners of large businesses are located. In this book, we will discuss in detail the technical features, since it is in them that the differences between rich and poor people are hidden. Summary of lessons. As a child, I spent hours sitting at a table in one of Rich Dad's restaurants while he discussed his affairs. During these discussions, I drank soda, and Rich Dad talked to his bankers, accountants, lawyers, brokers, real estate agents, financial advisors, and insurance agents. This was the beginning of my education in the field of business. From the age of 9 to 18, I spent long hours listening to these men and women solve complicated business problems. But when I went to New York to study at college for 4 years, and then served in the Marines for 5 years, the lessons at the table ended. Now, when I already had an academic education, and military service was about to end, I was ready to continue lessons with Mike's father. I called Rich Dad, fully prepared to start our lessons again. He handed over the business to his son and is now half retired. Mike's father was looking for something to do other than play golf all day. While Mike was busy running their empire, Rich Dad and I were having lunch at a hotel on Waikiki Beach. It was during a break between flights, and by the evening I had to report to the base for another departure, so I came in military uniform. When Rich Dad saw me, he was taken aback. He had never seen me in uniform before. Rich Dad remembered me as a child, dressed in casual clothes, shorts, jeans, t-shirts. Apparently, he began to realize that I had grown up, had seen the world and been to war. "Is that what you did after school?" Mike's father said. I nodded and said, "For years as a sailor in New York, then 4 years in the Marines, there's still a year left." "I'm very proud of you," Rich Dad said. "Thank you," I answered. "But it would be good to take off the military uniform as soon as possible. It's hard when people spit on you, or stare at you, or call you a child killer. I really want this to end as soon as possible for all of us." "I'm glad Mike didn't have to join the army," his father said. "He wanted to enroll, but his health is too weak." "He was lucky," I said. "I lost a lot of friends in the war, it would be terrible to lose Mike too." Rich Dad nodded and asked, "So what are you planning to do after your military contract ends?" "Well, 3 of my friends were offered to work as pilots in airlines. It's hard to get a job right now, but they say they have some connections and promise to help me get a job there too." "So are you thinking of working for an airline?" Mike's father asked. I nodded slowly. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm thinking about it. They pay well and the benefits are good. In addition, I had quite intensive flight training. Having flown in combat conditions, I became a good pilot. If I manage to work for a small airline for a year and fly more hours on multi-engine planes, I will be ready to work for large air carriers." "Is that what you want to do?" Rich Dad asked. "No," I said, "I don't want to. Especially after what happened to my dad and after breakfast at Mike's new house. I couldn't sleep for a long time last night. I've been thinking about what you said about investing. And I realized that if I go to work for an airline, then maybe one day I will still become an accredited investor, but it is unlikely that I will ever be able to rise above this level." Mike's father sat in silence, nodding slightly. "So my words hit the mark after all?" he said softly. "Right to the point," I answered. "I was remembering everything you taught me before. Now I am an adult and these lessons have gained a new meaning for me." "And what did you remember?" Rich Dad asked. "I remembered how you took 10 cents an hour from me and made me work for free," I replied. "You wanted to teach me how not to become a wage slave." Mike's father laughed and said, "It must have been a difficult lesson." "Yeah," I noticed. "But useful. Then my father was very offended with you, and now he himself has to live without a salary. And I was only 9 when I got this lesson. After lunch at Mike's, I swore that I wouldn't cling to a stable job all my life just because I needed a salary. That's why I don't think I'll be looking for a job in airlines. That's why I'm having lunch with you now. I want you to repeat your lessons on how to make money work for me so that I don't have to spend my whole life working for money. But this time I want to receive lessons as an adult. Let them be more difficult and more detailed." "And what was my first lesson?" Rich Dad asked. "That the rich don't work for money," I answered quickly. "They know how to make money work for them." Rich Dad's face broke into a satisfied smile. He made sure that, as a child, I listened to him attentively. "Well done," he said. "This is a good basis for becoming an investor. All investors learn how to make money work hard for them." "That's why I want to learn," I said quietly. "I want to learn what you know, and maybe teach it to my father." Now he is in a very difficult position, trying to start all over again at the age of 52. "I know," Rich Dad said, "I know." That's how, on that sunny day, when surfers were gliding on the delightful waves of the dark blue ocean, my lessons on investing began. The learning process consisted of 5 phases, each of which raised me to the next, higher level of understanding of the Rich Dad's thinking process and his investment plan. The lessons began with the preparation of my mind and the development of the ability to manage it, because in fact, the investment takes place in the mind. Ultimately, the success of investing from start to finish depends on the investor's ability to manage himself. The investment lessons included in the first phase of Rich Dad's investment plan are completely devoted to the mental preparation necessary to start real investing. My mental preparation began that night in 1973, when I was lying on a cot in my shabby room at the military base. Mike was lucky to have a father who amassed a huge fortune. I was less fortunate. In many ways, he had a 50-year head start in front of me. I had yet to start. That night I began my mental preparation by making a choice between finding a guaranteed job, my poor dad's dear, and laying the foundation for a real wealth of my rich dad's dear. This is where the investment process and Rich Dad's lessons begin. This is a very important decision, because how you want to be rich, poor, or middle income will depend on how everything will change in your life. Chapter 3. Investor Lesson Number 3. Choice. So, Rich Dad's lessons on investing have begun. When it comes to money and investing, a person can choose 3 main reasons to invest. Guarantee security, provide comfort, become rich. All these reasons are very important. The order of their arrangement by priority will determine how a person's life will change. He went on to say that most people make decisions related to money and investments in this order. In other words, when it comes to money, safety comes first, comfort comes second, and the desire to become rich comes third. That's why the highest priority for most people is job security. After getting a stable job or a sought-after profession, they focus on comfort. In the last place for many is the desire to become rich. On that day, 1973, Mike's father said, "Most people dream of having an impressive fortune, but for them this is not a priority task." In America, only 3 people out of 100 become rich because they make this goal their priority. If in order to become rich it is necessary to sacrifice comfort or security, many give up trying to create a fortune. That's why they need valuable investment advice. People for whom safety and comfort come first and second are looking for ways to get rich quickly, which would be easy, convenient, and not risky. Few people become rich thanks to one successful investment, but these lucky ones, as a rule, lose everything. Rich or happy? People often say it's better to be happy than rich. This phrase has always seemed very strange to me. I have been both rich and poor. Both in that and in another financial situation, I have been both happy and unhappy. I wonder why people think that it is necessary to choose between happiness and wealth. When I think about it, it seems to me that what they really mean is this: it's better to feel safe and live in comfort than to be rich. Probably, the fact is that they simply cannot be happy when they feel danger and discomfort. As for me, I was willing to sacrifice security and comfort in order to become rich. Since in any financial situation I have happened to be both happy and unhappy, believe me that when I was poor and unhappy, I was much worse off than when I was rich and unhappy. Besides, I could never agree with the saying that happiness is not in money. Maybe there is some truth in this, but I have always noticed that when I have money, I feel much better. I remember once I found a $10 bill in my jeans pocket. Although it was a small thing, I was very pleased with the find. Receiving money is always more pleasant than bills that need to be paid. Anyway, that's my personal experience. I am happy when they come and sad when they leave. Then, in 1973, I set my priorities in the following order: to become rich, to provide comfort, to guarantee security. As already noted, when it comes to money and investing, all three tasks are very important. In what order to place them is a purely personal decision that should be made before you start investing. For example, my poor dad's number one priority was to guarantee security, and the rich one's was to become rich. A mental attitude test. Wealth, comfort, and security are the main personal values. All of them are important. But I firmly know that choosing the most important values for you often has a significant and lasting impact on your lifestyle. That's why it's necessary to determine which values are most important to you, especially when it comes to money and financial planning. And now a question about the mental attitude. What are your core values? List your values in order of priority. Perhaps some of you will have to dig carefully into your true feelings. Have a serious talk with your legal half or with a mentor. Make a list of all the pros and cons. Knowing your own priorities will save you from many painful decisions and sleepless nights. One of the reasons for the relevance of the 90-10 rule to the world of money, perhaps, is that 90% of people put comfort and security above the desire to become rich.
Dear listeners, write down what other books you would like to listen to in audio format. Thank you for your likes and comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We wish you all the best.